heaven, you must be born from above. Some of you may know this passage a little differently. You might remember it, born again, right? There's a quirk here, there's a linguistic issue here, that the word used in Greek can mean again or above. So you'll see both translations. But it's this passage where the born again label comes from. Raise your hand if you have met or you know someone who calls themselves a born again Christian. Probably have folks in your family, friends, coworkers. Indeed, there may be folks in here today who think of themselves as born again Christians. This is the passage, this is the phrase where that label, that name, born again, comes from. Jesus says, if you want to see the kingdom of heaven, you must be born again. Now, if you talk to someone who claims this label, this name of a born again Christian, and you ask them, what does that mean for you? Most often you'll hear something like this. They'll say, well, at a certain point in my life, in my past, I had an interior conversion of the heart. They might use that language, right? Where they offered a prayer and they committed themselves. They committed to being a follower of Jesus. And for them, that's what it means to be born again. In that moment, they were sort of reborn into a new life. Now, I think this kind of commitment, this kind of interior conversion is really crucial and important. Born-again Christians aren't super common in Episcopal churches, but we could use a little bit more of this in our spiritual life, I think. That deep commitment is crucial. Really following Jesus isn't that easy, so you've really got to be committed to the path. However, I don't think that this is all that Jesus meant when he talks about being born again. This commitment is crucial, but I think there's a lot more to do. The commitment is like the first step in the journey, but being born again is a long journey of years, of decades, of a lifetime. It's one thing to commit to something, and it's another thing to actually follow through. Being born again is the follow-through. It's what comes after. So if Jesus isn't just talking about that commitment, that one moment of commitment, what is he talking about when he talks about being born again? Well, it's clear for me that Jesus is telling Nicodemus that there's a radical transformation that has to happen. There's a huge change, right? Being born again sounds like you're becoming maybe a different person, or a new version of who you are. It's something really dramatic. It doesn't just happen in a moment. Now, last week I suggested that Lent is a time for honesty. For us to reflect, to ask, who am I? And who do I want to be? Right? Who am I? Who do I want to be? So Lent is a time for transformation too. Right? If you're like me, you look at yourself and you see, this is who I am, and it's not exactly who I'd like to be. There's a gap here. And Lent is a great time to start to move and close that gap, to be transformed, to be changed, right? Lent is a great time to say, I want to be more loving. I want to be more generous. I want to be more disciplined, right? I want to live the life that I actually want. And that's part of what Jesus is saying here. Yeah, be changed, be transformed. Commit, take that first step, but then keep taking more steps on this journey. But the more I reflected on this passage this week, the more I was convinced that last week I missed something. Jesus is calling me to more. Jesus has more to say. Last week I kind of gave us 2 steps. Step 1, who am I? Step 2, who do I want to be? And that's good. But I think I hear Jesus adding a 3rd step. He's always doing this to us, right? There's always more. There's always another step. There's always some other difficult thing we have to do. Right? There's who I am, and there's who I want to be, and then there's who God calls me to be. That's where it gets tough. Because I want to be more loving, but I think I hear Jesus telling me that God wants me to be perfectly loving. And I want to be more generous. God, I think, wants me to be infinitely generous. And I want to be more disciplined sometimes. God wants me to be totally disciplined, living the life that I actually am called to. I want to be more. God wants me to be perfectly and infinitely loving, generous, committed, and disciplined. And that's tough. There's this third step that Jesus is adding, right? This total transformation. And I think ultimately, part of what Jesus is telling us today too is, look, this isn't going to happen in this lifetime. It's not just that being born again doesn't happen in one moment, on one day, but really, on this side of eternity, in this life, none of us is going to be perfectly loving. I don't think. Right? This is God's work, and it's beyond our ability to do, it's beyond our ability to understand. But Jesus is pointing us in that direction, saying, this is what this is about. This is the journey you're on. This is the path that I'm talking about. Total transformation. Becoming that perfectly, infinitely loving and generous person. That's what God is calling us to do. That's what it means to have union with God. That's what it means to be born again. And it's the end of the journey, not the beginning. That's the being born again. You know, that all sounds good, but it's a little abstract, right? So I found myself asking, how can I make this more concrete? How can I picture this for myself? What does it really mean? How can I envision this? And I found myself thinking about caterpillars. Yes, I said caterpillars, you didn't mishear me. This is now a sermon about caterpillars. I bet you didn't see that coming. Think about a caterpillar. Really, please, think about a caterpillar for a moment. Whenever I picture a caterpillar, I picture the green kind, the little short, stubby green one, right? It looks like a little worm with little stubby legs, and mostly just a big mouth, right? It just eats leaves all day, chomps down on leaves all day, right? That's a caterpillar. And I began to wonder, I began to think, if I could have a conversation with a caterpillar, right? Okay, there are any biologists here? I know you can't have a conversation with a caterpillar, I understand. Let's be creative for a second. If you could have a conversation with a caterpillar, you could have our Lenten conversation with a caterpillar, and ask the caterpillar, who are you? And who do you want to be? Step one, step two. I think the caterpillar would say, well, I'm a caterpillar. I spend all day eating leaves. I'm this little kind of worm-like thing, and that's great. I like this. I love eating leaves. It's really what I want to do. And I want to eat and eat and eat. I want to get bigger and stronger. I want to be a bigger, stronger caterpillar. Right? That's step two. Bigger, stronger. I'm going to eat a lot, bulk up. Right? And the trick, of course, is that we know something the caterpillar doesn't know. That there's this stage 3. We know that God calls the caterpillar to be something very different. Right? We know that if all goes as planned, the caterpillar becomes butterfly. Now the thing is, I think if you walked over and we talked to Matthew or Andrew, we showed them a caterpillar and a butterfly, they would tell you, right, in the clarity of their youth, they would tell you, no two animals look more different than a caterpillar and a butterfly, right? The caterpillar is this little worm thing. Stubby legs, big old shooting mouth. Butterfly is totally different. It's long, elegant. It has these 6 long legs. Its mouth is totally different, right, for drinking nectar. The caterpillar has no wings. The butterfly has all wings. The caterpillar frequently is green or brown, so you don't see it. The butterfly is covered in these beautiful colors. Really, no two animals really look more different from each other. And yet, it's true. The caterpillar becomes a butterfly. That's what God is calling the caterpillar to. That's step 3 for the caterpillar. I think this is what Jesus is telling Nicodemus and us about following him, about what it means to be born again. It's that kind of transformation. It's that radical. It's that strange. It's that unexpected. Maybe even that unwelcome. And it strikes me that it's so interesting that when the butterfly emerges from the cocoon, it really does look like it's being hatched from an egg again. It really is a second birth for this creature. And it's a dramatic transformation. That's, I think, the step 3. That's the being born again. It's that kind of radical change that Jesus is calling us to. If we're committing to Jesus, that's the kind of thing that we're committing to. Total transformation of who we are. We want to be more loving. We're called to be perfectly loving. We want to be more generous. We're called to be infinitely generous. We want to be more disciplined. We're called to be totally disciplined in this life of faith. Now, all that said, of course, it's really important recognize that you can't jump over step 2. I'm not suggesting that we can just go from 1 to 3. Boom. No. This is the work of a lifetime. Step 2 is that work of preparing ourselves. Just like a caterpillar that's just hatched is not big enough to become a butterfly. It has to eat. It has to prepare itself. It has to be bigger and stronger before it's ready for that transformation. So likewise, we need to grow in our faith. We need to do the work of being more loving and more generous and more disciplined. That's not the end point, but that's the step that we're at in this life. We have to do that work. Committing to this process, committing to being a disciple of Jesus, is crucial. I want to be clear about that. But it is just the first step in a long journey of faith, a long journey of struggling to be more of who we want to be, and then ultimately to be who God calls us to be. So this Lent, my fellow caterpillars, let's strengthen ourselves. Let's strengthen our faith. Let's deepen and broaden our faith. Let's try to be more loving and more generous and more disciplined. We'll mess up a lot, and that's okay. Let's take step 2 seriously. Let's do that work. But let's also always remember that we caterpillars really are called to be butterflies.